I uncovered 3 haunted tales of unimaginable terror that left me questioning reality. I never should have opened that door. The night was heavy, thick with a darkness that felt almost alive. I had been just an ordinary person, going about my routine, my home filled with the usual hum of life. But that night, everything changed. I remember the chill that crept up my spine as I stood in front of the door. It was an unwelcome cold that seemed to gnaw at my bones. I could hear whispers, soft, slithering sounds that flickered in and out of comprehension. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and contorting in ways that felt wrong. I pushed the door, despite the warnings in my gut. It creaked open like a coffin, unleashing a wave of stale air that smelled of decay. I stepped inside, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. The darkness enveloped me, swallowing my senses whole. Then came the strange noises. A sudden thump echoed from the corner, causing my breath to hitch. My eyes darted around, searching for the source. Was it my mind playing tricks? I could barely focus as my heart rattled in my ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught something of fleeting movement, a shadow that darted just beyond my vision. Fear gripped me tighter. I clutched the doorframe, ready to bolt, but something held me there. I wanted to flee, yet a morbid curiosity rooted me in place. Objects began to shift, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The chill grew colder, more intense, as if the house itself mourned for what happened inside. And then, in a jarring moment, a loud bang reverberated through the space. My heart leaped to my throat, and my body went rigid. I was frozen, horror raging in my chest as I faced the darkness. There, looming in the shadows, was a figure. I could barely make out its feature-sand outline that was all wrong, twisted in a way that defied reality. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The figure stepped closer, crossing into the faint light. My heart raced, pounding with a mix of terror and awe. I was paralyzed with fear, the door behind me a mere illusion of safety. And just as I thought I might escape, everything went silent. The world shrank, and the weight of despair hung heavy. I was alone, surrounded by a darkness that felt all too hungry. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon, and while you're there, smash that like button. It really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The silence pulsated around me like a living entity, thickening the air until it felt suffocating. My mind screamed at me to turn back, to run. Yet an unseen force anchored my feet to the floor. The figure, now less a shadow and more a nightmare made flesh, drew nearer, each movement deliberate, as if savoring my terror. It hovered just outside the dim light, its form flickering as though caught between realms, grotesque features morphing and shifting in a dance that made my stomach churn. Its eyes void of nothingness bore into me, and for an agonizing moment, I felt the weight of its despair wrap around my heart. I couldn't breathe. Dread coiled tightly around my chest, squeezing with familiar malice. A faint whisper slithered through the air, weaving into my consciousness, threading with my fears. It was a chant, a sinister melody that rose and fell like distant thunder, echoing stories of those lost in its grasp. I couldn't decipher the words. They were sharp and jagged, scraping against my sanity. Stay forever, the wretched voice hissed, resonating deep within the walls. A tight shiver ran through me as I recognized the bizarre treatise my heart was currently echoing. Those who ventured here never left. I turned to the door, desperate for escape, but the world outside felt like a distant dream. The shadows thickened, blurring the outline of my exit. Just one more, the figure crooned, and I recoiled instinctively as it reached out a bony hand. His fingers, elongated and frail, were soaked in darkness, almost as if they belonged to the very shadows that cloaked the room. I finally found my scream and let it burst forth like a raw, wounded animal. The sound shattered the oppressive quiet, ricocheting off the walls, but to my horror, the dark figure seemed to revel in it as my voice echoed away. The whisper poured back and intensified. One more soul to dwell among us with each repetition. A chorus arose, soft weeping, frantic cries, voices of the damned, weaving a tapestry of agony that entwined around my mind. Without thinking, I lunged for the door, dread pushing me forward. My fingers gripped the frame, but the moment I touched the knob, I felt a cold, clammy hand wrapping around my wrist, like ice encasing my flesh. A soul caught between anguish and cold anticipation. I screamed again, now more a plea for survival than a sound of terror. "Join us," came the echoing laughter of the figure as it tightened its grip, its face twisting into a grotesque grin filled with malice and delight. It was as if it fed off my fear, and my struggle only intensified its thrall. I twisted and pulled, the icy fingers digging deeper, draining my resolve, until my knees buckled, and I crashed to the floor. Instinctively, I crawled away, dragging myself across the rotting wood. My mind raced, searching for a way to sever that grip, to escape the nightmare that engulfed me. Behind me, the figure remained, its laughter stalking me, mingling with the cries of others, endless, rolling, despairing cries that lingered just beyond the precipice of my awareness. Then, despite the horror of my situation, a flicker of hope clawed through the darkness. I remembered the lantern, barely visible in the far corner of the room. If I could reach it, the light could drive back the shadows, could protect me. I dragged myself closer, clenching my teeth against the numbness threatening to overtake my limbs. With every inch forward, I felt its cold presence drawing near, the whispers growing frantic, urging me to stop, to surrender. The air crackled with something otherworldly as the shadows loomed larger, their forms contorting, reaching for me, craving my surrender. I reached out and grabbed the cold handle of the lantern, pulling it toward me with a surge of desperation. But suddenly, the room reverberated with a guttural roar, shaking the very essence of the house. The grip on my wrist faltered for a moment. It was just the window rattling in the wind, I told myself. But when I turned to look, the figure stood closer than before, grinning wider, eyes glaring with a manic hunger. And then, just as I brushed the lantern's rim, I realized something horrifying, a dreadful realization that chilled me deeper than the darkness itself. Surrounding me, from the shadows, figures emerged, a cacophony of faces twisted in agony. They stretched their hands toward me, mouths moving in that cursed chant, joining the plea for one more soul. I felt the ground tremble as the reality I knew began to fragment. The walls pulsed, and the whispers converged into one jarring climax. "Join us," they cried, hands reaching, fingers curling towards my throat, encasing me in the suffocating dark. The last thing I saw was the lantern's light flickering as shadows closed around me. My heart raced, a drumbeat against the suffocating void. I couldn't escape. I was about to join them when the lantern exploded, and everything went black. I awakened, disoriented, the darkness most profound, stretching beyond the limits of my comprehension. Cold sweat clung to my skin, and as I instinctively pushed myself upright, I felt the weight of dread still lingering, a thick fog of terror wrapping its tendrils around me. The inexplicable sensation of being watched ignited a primal fear within. My heart thudded frantically, a heartbeat outpacing the encroaching silence. An unsettling stillness enveloped me. Yet the echoes of that horrific chant replayed mercilessly in my mind, each moment stretching as wisps of shadow danced just beyond my periphery. I blinked away the confusion, my surroundings slowly solidifying. I found myself in a narrow corridor, the wooden floor creaking beneath me, a graveled whisper of warnings. The air felt thick, as if imbued with the weight of despair, and any flicker of light had vanished. Unease thrummed in the pit of my stomach as I instinctively turned to gauge where I had come from, but the memory of the lantern and its brilliant light came back to me in shards, splintered images of darkness engulfing my scream, the figures reaching, their mossy fingers caressing the edges of my sanity. I shivered, feeling pulled to the unknown end of the corridor ahead. Drawn as if by an invisible string, I crept forward, each step echoing like a drum, a rhythm I could not control. It felt as though the walls were pulsing in time with my heartbeat, suffocatingly close, their surfaces marred by grotesque shapes that clawed at the corners of my vision. The pervasive sense of something vile lurking in the fabric of this place tightened my throat, a whispered threat coiling deep in my consciousness. Then, a sudden movement caught my eye, a flicker of something that skittered around the corner. My breath hitched. Curiosity battled with caution, and against my better judgment, I pressed on. The corridor widened as I advanced, the atmosphere growing denser, a humid miasma pressing against my skin as I turned the corner. The sight before me froze the breath in my lungs. An ancient, twisted staircase spiraled upward like the gaping maw of a beast. The wood splintered and warped under the weight of years. But it wasn't the staircase itself that paralyzed me. It was the figures occupying the shadows around it. They stood in eerie stillness, their heads bowed, arms slack at their sides, draped in tattered rags that flowed like mist against the stairs. They were remnant specters of despair caught between the threshold of existence and the abyss. "Join us," they murmured through cracked and hollow voices, a duplicity of sounds merging into a dissonant chorus that tugged at the edges of my soul. I felt a shiver claw its way up my spine as a dreadful understanding dawned. They were the souls lost before me, pawns in the dark figure's grotesque game. As if sensing my paralyzing fear, they began to lift their heads. Eyes like bottomless pits filled with sorrow met mine, a void so deep that it threatened to pull me under. I stumbled backwards, heart racing, and this time, I turned to flee. But the moment I spied the staircase again, I heard a distinct sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping echoing from above. It was an urgency that cut through my panic, luring me. Close era siren cry beckoning me to the unknown. I didn't want to follow. I didn't want to be their companion, but my body moved independently, steps carrying me involuntarily toward the stairs. Each tap resonated in my chest, matching the pulse of dread coursing through my veins. The figures around me began to sway, a chilling symphony of whispers weaving tighter as they murmured my name. The staircase beckoned like a dark promise, its end obscured by shadows undulating like smoke. Knowing the lurking presence behind me, I hesitated at the first step, but, propelled by an unseen force, I ascended. Each footfall echoed louder than the last, like a hammer striking flesh, agony proliferating with every inch I climbed. The tapping above quickened, a wretched dance echoing through the winding staircase until I spotted a faint flicker of light seeping through a crack in the ceiling above. Hope swelled in my chest, the light promising salvation from the suffocating dark below. As I approached the threshold, the whispers intensified, a tempest of souls screaming for acknowledgement, clawing for release. But when I reached the top, horror struck. The door loomed ahead, partially ajar, warmth spilling into the shadows like a taunting mockery. I pushed it open, and the light spilled forth, revealing an empty room swathed in golden hues. My heart soared for a fleeting moment, betraying the dread stitched within my mind. But before I could step forward, I felt it like ice running through my veins. Behind me, the figures melted away, a transient presence dissipating with the softest sigh, and then it was there. The unmistakable dread of the dark figure materializing at the bottom of the staircase, eyes ablaze with hunger. As it raised a hand in invitation, a single chilling word resonated through the air. "Stay," and in that moment, the door behind me swung shut with a deafening clang, sealing my fate, the warmth of light flickering dangerously as shadows swallowed me whole. The last thing I saw was the dark figure stepping closer, stretching out its bony fingers, and then there was nothing. The air crackled with tension as darkness enveloped me. Confined within the room, I could almost feel the pulsing heartbeat of the House Itzelfan organ of anguish, a living entity that thrummed beneath the surface of reality. The golden light that had beckoned me felt tainted now, hues bleeding into muted grayish shadows that danced across the walls like phantoms celebrating their victories. Where the dark figure had stood, I sensed a void, as if the very air wept in retreat, leaving my senses drowning in despair. My pulse thrummed louder, a pounding drum summoning forth my most primal fears. I felt the longing of the specters thrumming against my consciousness, a desperate cry for connection, for company in their infinite darkness. Stay echoed in my Minda serenade of entrapment. Though I resisted with all my might, dread seeped like ink, saturating my every thought. I took a cautious step into the room, suddenly reeling in uncertainty. The golden light sparked spasmodically, casting wild shadows across the space, revealing details unsettlingly bizarre. The floors bore the patterned markings of countless anguished feet, a sinister dance between the corporeal and the spectral. There were no furnishings. Only a long, aged mirror stood against the far wall, its edges gilded in tarnished gold that appeared to glimmer mockingly. Something moved behind the glass, just a fleeting shadow, but it stirred the air with an uncanny chill, heralding something sinister trapped within. I edged closer, every instinct shrieking for me to flee, but morbid curiosity glued my feet to the floor. The mirror's surface rippled like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Swirling images conjured from its depths, lost souls clawing at the glass, faces twisted in agony, each haunting visage demanding recognition. Why? I gasped, as if the mirror could provide salvation. What do you want from me? I turned my back to the mirror, desperate for a semblance of control. That's when I heard Ida's soft rustling, like dried leaves carried by a sinister wind. The noise burgeoned, solidifying into whispers around me, overlapping phrases tinged with desperation. Just as I grasped their urgency, piercing laughter erupted, filling the chamber, cacophony of delight woven with malice, echoing off the walls until it filled every crevice of the room. It was the joy of creatures thriving on suffering, and then, the whispering began to form into words, illuminated by that flickering light. Time to join us. You'll fit right in, they beckoned, their voices like threads weaving deeper into my mind, pulling me closer to the mirror. Suddenly, an overwhelming force surged from the glass. The reflections morphed, faces melded into one singular being, a grotesque amalgamation that stared at me with those bottomless pits of sorrow. I stumbled back, and in that instant, the room shifted, the golden light extinguished completely, plunging me once more into an oppressive darkness. But the closeness of something breathing in my ear told me I wasn't alone. Join us, it whispered, sending chills clawing down my spine. Panic surged. I whirled around, heart hammering in my ears, as I grasped for the door that had just sealed me in this wretched chamber. My fingers grasped at empty air. The door was gone, leaving only an impenetrable wall of warped shadows, with mere breaths separating me from fate. The mirror crackled from behind, revealing a fragmented reflection of myself, twisted, dragging, weighed down by unseen chains. Chains forged of fear, despair, and the very essence of my existence, binding me to a destiny I could not fathom. A faint light flickered from deep within the mirror, a promise mingled with temptation. Come to me, the visage called, and at that moment, the mirror shattered, a cascade of glass raining down upon the ground like a million whispering voices unleashed into the void. In that dreadful moment of clarity, I realized the truth. The echoing laughter belonged to Mito, a version of myself I refused to confront. But then I felt the sensation of ghosts rushing through me, their longing intertwined with mine, a shared consciousness flooding my veins. The specters surged, and I was swept up against my will. With a final, chilling cry, I was sucked into the depths of the mirror, plunging into despair. In a heartbeat, I collided with the cold reality of another chamber, its air heavy with sorrowful wails and the lingering trace of fresh blood. I barely had time to think before the presence of souls enveloped me, shadowy forms rising from the ground, forming a sea of darkness. Desperation swelled as I fought against the tide, clawing upwards, but my grasp slipped. The laughter resonated louder, the dark figure emerging once again, obscured in shadows. You are mine now, it whispered, leaning closer until its breath mingled with my own, icy and sweet. And as the last light flickered, showcasing the hollow faces of the damned, my scream echoed into the abyss, swallowed by the shadows. I was lost amongst them, fading into the very darkness I had struggled to escape. In that last breath of unending dread, I realized it wasn't my soul they craved, it was my identity, dissolving into the void. But just as everything faded to black, one haunting fragment lingered in my mind. The memory of the staircase, still waiting for another unsuspecting soul to sing its siren call. The chamber I found myself in was unlike any other I had encountered. A disorienting underworld steeped in shadows, suffocating and damp, as if the very walls wept. I was submerged in an ocean of darkness, with no discernible source of light or comfort, only a pulsating tension in the air, thick as fog and clinging to my skin. Disembodied whispers floated around me, sibilant secrets twisted in pain, beckoning me closer yet forcing me to retreat. Stay with us. With each breath, I grew acutely aware of the presence surrounding me, an unseen mass that thrummed in unison, a congregation of lost souls whose despair rang louder than the clamors of the living. The laughter that had chased me within the previous chamber reverberated again, taunting me with its cruel mirth. They savored my unease as if it were a fine wine that I stumbled forward instinctively, seeking a way out. The floor squelched beneath my steps, an unsettling mixture of dirt and something else, something viscous. As I inched deeper into the abyss, memories flooded my mind, unbidden, a blighted gallery of moments filled with dread, of doors closing and children's laughter warped into wails. The whispers morphed into fragmented sentences, bits of advice tainted with malice. It is too late for you. You cannot escape what you have awakened. There is no keeping yourself safe. Each phrase echoed in concert with my racing heart, reminding me of my failures as if in answer. A shadow flickered just beyond the periphery of my vision, a fleeting silhouette that seemed almost human, its features twisted by an unseen force. I turned, only to find empty air. Yet the laughter continued, swelling until it filled every crevice, seeming to reflect off my very bones. You cannot leave, you belong to us now. Each echo of that laughter reverberated deeper inside me, resonating with that part of myself I feared to confront. The walls began to close in, slick with moisture, pressing against me like 1,000 hands yearning to grasp my throat and pull me down, deeper into the mire. That I, in an attempt to gather my fragmented sanity, I clawed desperately at the ground. My nails scraped against the floor, revealing a matter beneath, rough and transformed. Not dirt but flesh, an amalgamation of distorted faces, twisting in agony, embedded into the very core of this accursed realm. Their eyes opened wide, pleading, ready to drag me under with them. Help us, save us. Their hushed cries merged into one haunting chorus, a twisted melody that filled the air, sinking into my bones. That was when I noticed a glowing fissure in the distance, teasingly luminous yet ominous, promising an escape but eerily beckoning me closer. With every ounce of strength, I stumbled toward it, the weight of the lost pressing heavy against my back, virtually anchoring me to despair. I felt the ground shift beneath me, the cries of the souls melding into a singular voice, imposing and firm. Do you not want to indulge in the truth? It asked, insistently, twisting my desire for knowledge into a weapon against me. Have you forgotten them? Memories of those I had lost brushed against me like whispers of wind, spiraling around my mind, illuminating my path but also showing me shadows I wished to leave behind. I hesitated, suspended between two realities. The laughter drew closer, more insistent, a cacophony of unable to let go. Suddenly, figures began to take form, horrified silhouettes reaching out, their fingers misty trails stretching toward me, and their once human faces now melded into grotesque parodies of familiarity, mirror images of lost loves and long-dead friends stretched into caricature of anguish. Join us! A piercing scream erupted from my throat before I could swallow the hope that these could be phantoms of my imagination. I faltered, feeling the energy surge around me, a build-up of sinister force that promised an enveloping embrace, a solidifying familiarity that sent shivers cascading down my spine. Embrace your fate. Suddenly, the light flickered violently, illuminating the chamber in haunting frames, revealing grotesque images of those who had succumbed before me, their faces frozen in terror, mouths open in silent screams, yet their eyes alive with sickness. I was pulled with a relentless pull, drawn closer still to that glowing fissure, and a tempest brewed within me, a battle of instincts. But then I felt a hand, icy cold and clammy, wrapping tightly around my wrist, severing the tether I had to hope. The grip tightened painfully, dragging me backward, toward the darkness that had followed me relentlessly. I thrashed, trying to break free, to escape the nightmarish embrace. Stay forever, the grip whispered, and the weight of it shattered what remained of my determination. Just as I felt myself tipping into the maw of shadow, the laughter crescendoed, merging into a symphony of unearthly cries and wild howls, each note a reminder of my fragility and the forces I had awakened. And in that fractured instant where light and dark collided violently, the forgotten corners of my mind erupted into stark reality torn between existence and oblivion. I caught a fleeting glimpse within the glowing fissure, a flash of the staircase I had seen before, illuminated against the suffocating dark, a promise of freedom that felt as distant as the sun itself. With one last surge of will, I clawed at the specter's grip and felt it loosen. Before I could plunge into the fissure, the ground beneath exploded into chaos, revealing a maw of darkness looming, ready to consume everything whole. As the chamber erupted, the last whisper I heard, rich with perverse glee, echoed around me. You can never escape, you've only just begun. In that ethereal moment of shattering reality, with shadows clawing hungrily at my feet, my pulse racing toward its conclusion, I realized that beneath every layer of agony and torment, there lay deeper truths I had yet to unearth, each truth a terrifying connection to my fate yet to be sealed. The world around me ruptured, engulfed in an eruption of cacophony, as I braced myself not for rescue, but for the inevitable plunge into the unknown, where horrors awaited like relatives long lost. The tumult of the world around me faded into a resonance of silence, a deafening void that mirrored my heart's frantic beating. I could feel the ragged breath of ancient shadows whispering promises I could neither understand nor ignore. Pain tingled at the edges of my consciousness, a sensation that dragged its claws through memory, revealing fragments I had forgotten. Names, faces, cries for help, all sweated in the depths, urgent and demanding. In the chaotic tumult, a fragment of hope drew closer, the fissure flickering with a dim, golden glow that whispered of escape. I lunged toward it with a desperate fervor, every shred of instinct screaming to flee, but shadows pooled at my feet, gesturing with accusatory hands, drawing me back, deeper into the suffocating unknown. I screamed, pushing against the darkness enveloping me, a frantic dance between despair and urgency. Not now. But something within the shadows responded, not with words but the suffocating heaviness of dread. The chamber twisted around me, and I felt myself being pulled in several directions at once, a dark marionette caught in an unseen puppeteer's grasp. The laughter grew, shaking the very foundation of my sanity. And then, as if on cue, reality warped and sputtered like a dying flame. I was yanked into the light only to have it extinguished, dragging me down into a new chamber, a grotesque parody of the one before. Dim embers glowed on the walls, revealing images that twitched and throbbed, as if the very stones held the memories of the tormented within. Blood pooled in the corners, a thick, viscous reminder of those who had come before me and did not escape. My breath caught as I turned, horror affirming my intuition, the 12 etched figures that flickered in and out of view, their expressions locked in paralyzed screams. I was not alone. I was merely amongst the collection of shadows deserving. Will you join us? They seemed to chant in unison, the echoes spiraling around me, coiling like fog. The air grew thick and cloying. Every breath I took tasted of iron and desperation, a visceral reminder of the horror I had stumbled into. As I turned to face the chamber's heartbeat, the very walls began to pulsate, throbbing in sync with my racing heart. Tendrils of dark smoke snaked out from the corners, wrapping around my legs like a lover's caress, sticky and suffocating, pulling me closer to a fate I could not comprehend. I forced myself to squint through the haze, uncovering the truth hidden beneath layers of sinister memory. Figures began to appear, enemies from my past, each more gruesome than the last, their faces warped in panic and despair. Each one was someone whose ambivalence I had chained around my heart like a prison made of guilt. You made us this way, one shrieked, the syllables slicing through the weight of despair like a knife. You abandoned us. No, I cried out, the disbelief falling heavily from my lips. But what I felt, as their eyes burrowed into my soul, was an unfathomable truth, the connection so visceral it rattled me to my core. These were the manifestations of my neglect and guilt, a mausoleum of my failures urging me back into the darkness where my life had begun to disintegrate. The shadows pulsed again, this time forming into a distinct outlinea figure as familiar as it was chilling. My mother, twisted beyond recognition, her wails woven into the very fabric of the chamber. "Why didn't you save me?" she moaned, her voice smothered by centuries of anger and sorrow, leaving nothing but grief in her wake. "I called for you." "No." I tried, I stammered, unable to breathe as the realization settled in here anguish was a mirror reflecting my own. I could recall the day she had disappeared, the day I had ignored the whispers of a world beyond the ordinary yet so terribly real. "I thought I'd lost you, thought there was no way back." "Lost?" Her laughter was cruel, mocking like the tortured souls surrounding us, the shadows closing in from all sides. "You were never lost. You cast us away." I began to back away, heart racing, only to feel the sticky darkness clinging to my skin, drawing me deeper still into this abyss of guilt and sorrow. I had battled my demons for so long, only to find they were far more powerful than I could have imagined. The chamber spun chaotically, the shadows now swirling like a tempest, seeking to claim what was rightfully theirs. "Join us," they hissed, an intoxicating promise threading through the despair. "They are waiting for you, all of them." At that moment, the laughter warped into a dissonant symphony, a grotesque serenade for the lost. With one final plunge into madness, I braced myself to escape, shoving against the dense mass. But the floor heaved violently beneath me, heaving up as if the very stones were alive, and I was thrown into utter darkness. Suddenly, through the cacophony of tortured voices, I heard a distinct sound, an earnest plea that sliced through the laughter. "Help me!" The darkness froze, crystallizing into an imminent dread. I turned frantically, and there, within the gathering shadows, a young girl's face emerged, the solar eclipse of innocence marred by suffering. "Im hier, im Treppet," she cried, eyes wide with terror, her fingers reaching through the void toward me. Just as I dared to stretch out my hand, to pull her from the abyss, the laughter erupted anew, a thunderous clap of delight reverberating through the chamber. The shadows welled around her, consuming that flicker of hope and snuffing it out like a dying star, leaving my heart to pound heavily, each beat echoing my soul's impending doom. And then, as they began to recede, the chamber groaned with an ominous finality, revealing a path that unfurled through the darkness toward the unattainable. I could feel its pull, brighter than the fracture of despair within me. But as I took a step towards hope, I felt the cold grip of my mother's ghostly presence wrapping around my throat, her face inches from mine, eyes dark as pits of despair. "You won't leave me again," she whispered, her breath a bitter chill. "We're bound together now." The reality of her words smashed into me with undeniable force as the shadows quaked with anticipation, promising irrevocable doom, yet urging the inevitable confrontation between denial and acceptance. And with that weighing finality, I was left with a solitary question echoing within the torment: what did it truly mean to confront the ghosts of my past, even at the cost of my own soul? As everything around me twisted in horror, the ground erupted, dragging me further into the depths of what I had long forsaken, unraveling with every moment, drawing me toward the ultimate revelation that awaited in that unfathomable dark. The suffocating embrace of shadows twisted tighter as I fought against the pull of my mother's ghost. Her presence was a shackle, heavy and unyielding, dragging me back into the depths of our shared anguish. My heart raced as I sensed the ancient hatred woven through the dark tendrils of fearsome tapestry of sorrow and unresolved guilt that threatened to consume me whole. "Leave me," I gasped, scrambling away, but the shadows wove a cocoon around my legs, tethering me to her spectral form. With every ounce of will, I turned to face the pulsating chamber, where the 12 etched figures watched with hungry curiosity, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and malice. They hadn't forgotten. They were my past come to life, witnesses to the torment I thought I had buried. "Help her, will you?" A voice coiled from the shadows, serpentine and inviting. "She needs you just as you needed her." With that, I felt the air shift, a surge of energy puncturing through the oppressive gloom. My pulse quickened. The walls throbbed in anticipation, taunting me to submit. Their desires echoed in my ears, begging for my surrender me mother's spirit, whispering sweet assurances, laced with poison. You can't escape, my dear, she crooned, her voice a siren's call wrapped in the folds of my nightmares. You belong here with us. Look at what you've created. Surging panic lit a fire in my veins as I glanced at the walls, where scenes played out me own guilt stained the stone like blood, each act of neglect alive like whispers begging for absolution. Every faux pas, every moment of selfishness played before me like puppets driven by unseen strings, each frame laced with the faces of those I had wronged. Enough, I shouted, furious tears streaming down my cheeks as I pushed against the darkness, fervently seeking an escape. My eyes darted to the ghostly child who had just moments ago reached for me, the small figure now lost obscured within a maelstrom of despair. I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning her, too. In an instant, the chamber flickered, a single beam of light piercing through the blackness, shimmering like a beacon through a dense fog. It illuminated the girl's anguished face, which contorted in fear and hope as she clawed desperately against the smothering shadows. Please, don't go. I need you. That plea ignited within me a reckless courage. I took a hesitant step forward, but the ground quivered, pulling me back toward the suffocating weight of regret. I had to fight. Let her go. I screamed into the storm of despair, and that whispered plea echoed through the hollow space, prompting a silence so profound it felt like an awakening after ages of darkness, a moment suspended in time. My mother's piercing gaze locked onto mine, swirling with emotions I could scarcely understand. Lose yourself, she screeched, her voice rising in a terrifying crescendo, tendrils of shadows extending ominously toward me, threatening to consume everything I cherished. The figures around me began to twitch, their gnarled limbs attempting to break free from the walls, yearning to seize me like fruits ripe for the harvest. One by one, they shrieked in an unholy union, voices merging into an unbearable chorus, each one crying out in mockery of my plight. You will be damned, they howled. Join us in eternal torment. I could see my own despair reflected in their ghastly visages, me doubts, my failures, blending into a grotesque parody of both my past and present. It was too much. It threatened to drown me, the weight of my sorrow crashing down like waves against a brittle shore. Fight them, the child's voice pierced through the oppressive fog. I'm right here. You have to help me. I took a breath, summoning reserves of strength I never knew I had. You will not conquer me, I declared against the storm, the flicker of light beckoning me through the chaos, urging me to leap into the unknown alongside the girl. With renewed determination, I lunged toward the ethereal glow, my essence fighting against the pull of despair. But just as my fingertips brushed the light, a fervent chill swept through the chamber. Darkness pulsed in fury, slamming into me like a tidal wave. I was hurled back into the reeling void. Fool! My mother howled, her voice reverberating with malevolence. You will never escape your sins. The walls warped, folding inward, as shadows compressed around me like a vice, and I felt my consciousness splintering. Then, amidst the smothering darkness, a single cry split the stillness, a pure, anguished wail that echoed infinitely, piercing through my mind like a knife. The plea spiraled into a poignant question that hung in the air, a chilling paradox. Who will save you now? The realization crashed over me, cold and unforgiving. I might have to sacrifice everything to break free from the horrors that bound me. In the heart of the storm, as despair closed in, the child's face dissolved into the shadows, and I held onto that thin thread of light, desperately reaching for it amidst the encroaching darkness. But just as my fingers grasped the edge of that tenuous beam, a cold hand clutched my wrist with a grip of iron, anchoring me back into the nightmares that I thought I could escape. Together forever, the voice hissed as everything around me plunged into pitch-black darkness, leaving only one terrifying certainty. I had not yet glimpsed the true horrors that awaited, and the line between salvation and damnation was paper-thin. The atmosphere thickened, pulling me deeper into the crushing void where light frayed and hope gasped for breath. My heart pounded as I felt my past wrap around me, morphing into nightmarish forms, specters of betrayal and heartache manifesting anew. The iron grip on my wrist tightened, and I was drawn into a chilling embrace I instinctively knew belonged to one of the figures, an unspeakable horror that craved not just my surrender, but my very essence. "Don't fight it," the voice cooed, dripping with malice. It resonated deep in my bones, a haunting melody of despair that promised solace only through submission. "We are family here. You cannot forsake your kind." The inky blackness. Shadowed faces emerged, each twisted into an expression of sorrow mingled with a joy that struck like a raw nerve. The plaster-like skin of my ancestors long departed stretched taut over bones that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. They beckoned me with skeletal fingers, and a part of me yearned to succumb, to join this morbid reunion. "Mother?" I dared to whisper, panic rising within my throat. Instead of comfort, I was met with a cacophony of sorrowful laughter, echoing from the walls as if the very stones were mocking me. "Face it." The grip around my wrist squeezed harder, sending shockwaves of pain through me. "They were wrong too. They never found peace. Neither will you." The looming specter twisted my thoughts, its shadow merging with my mother's essence. And suddenly every sin I had regretted spiraled before me again. Each name, each face I had tried to forget flared into being. Distorted memories flooded my mind. The laughter of a sibling lost to jealousy, the quiet sobs of a friend betrayed. They hung in the air, specters of my own failures, yearning for retribution as the chamber pulsed with ancient fury. "Join us," they chorused, their forms shimmering like oil on water, blurring into a grotesque dance of despair, inviting me into their fold with a sinister charm. "Only then can you be free." I stumbled back, tearing free of the spectral grasp, a surge of adrenaline fueling my defiance. "No, this ends now," I cried, my voice swallowed only by the swirling abyss. Beyond the grasp of shadows, a flicker sparked in my mind, the flicker of light that had tried to guide me once before. It was a beacon against the suffocating dark, and I was determined to reach it. "Leave her," I screamed, the words carrying an unfamiliar weight. The shadows recoiled, hesitating, but only for a moment before they swarmed again, darker and more powerful, shrieking in rage at my defiance. "Sacrifices must be made." My mother's voice thundered through the chamber, now a tempest of rage and sorrow. "To claim your freedom, someone must pay the price." The faces of my ancestors twisted, morphing into grotesque visages of betrayal and longing, clawing at the air, their eyes lighting with a hunger that sent chills coursing through my veins. The light pulsated, flickering as if it too trembled in the face of the encroaching darkness. A sharp pain shot through me as the shadows collided, and in that moment of agony, a choice materialized, one that bore the weight of centuries of anguish. A blinding flash illuminated the chamber, the white light breaking through the darkness like a knife. I was momentarily suspended, the choice slicing through my thoughts. To save myself or sacrifice the innocent face of the child, still trapped somewhere within the folds of despair around me. And just as I reached for the light, a horrifying revelation washed over Meth. Child was not alone. Spectral forms gathered behind her, each face familiar yet warped, the shadows blending into the tapestry of my own past. They were all intertwined, lost souls bound by the same sorrow I carried. "Let her go," I shouted, desperate yet trembling. Then came the uproar of the chamber, every figure dissolving into a swarm, a whirlwind of chaos pulling and tugging at my sanity. "But to save them, you must be willing to sacrifice dearly." The voice snarled, distorted and threaded through the eternal darkness. It thrummed in my chest, twisting my heart until I could barely breathe. Suddenly, my vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, punctuated by the chilling realization that one of the figures was advancing close-era young face with familiar features, eyes filled not with innocence, but with a knowing darkness that had once been masked by my love. "You will choose, dear heart," it rasped, its voice a mockery of everything I had known, before I could process the horror unfurling before me. An icy hand burst through the shadows, grabbing my throat, tightening like a vice, leaving me gasping. "Choose now, or we all will be lost forever." The chamber echoed with the thrill of confrontation, a maelstrom of agony encircling me, a heart-wrenching dilemma manifesting. I stood at the precipice, teetering on the edge of eternity, unsure if salvation lay in the light ahead, or if the true horror awaited within. My heart sank as I yet again felt an icy grip reaching through the shadows, ready to claim my very soul. Who will you save? It hissed, a question that would haunt me forever. And in that moment, in the clutches of a darkness so profound it threatened to swallow the last vestiges of hope, I knew that the end was only the beginning of darker things that awaited. The light blinked and faltered, and for a heartbeat, hope flickered like a dying ember. Shadows continued to claw at my skin, whispering of ancient betrayals and tears shed in grief that was not just my own but belonged to all of them, my family of forsaken souls. As the icy fingers of the specter around my throat tightened, they surged with dark energy, feeding off my fear and despair. My vision narrowed, the edges of reality blurring with every ragged breath. I can't breathe, I gasped, feeling consciousness slip through my fingers like grains of sand. The room spun violently, darkness swirling, the faces of the damned blending into an anguished whirlpool of memories that surged upwards, bursting forth like the boiling tide of an unseen ocean. You will never escape us, the child's voice breathed sinisterly, and suddenly, the familiar contours of her features twisted beyond recognition. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide. The softness I once cradled in my arms had been devoured by the abyss. We were always waiting for you to claim your destiny. Join us. Become one with the forgotten. No, I roared, summoning a reservoir of rage and defiance from within. I had fought too hard to be reduced to this twisted reunion. Flashes of my childhood sprang forth, the simplicity of laughter and love juxtaposed against the cold and malevolence surrounding me. With the force of an unseen tide, I ripped my arm free from the specter's grip, sending it reeling. Ignited by desperation, I plunged into the swirling darkness seeking the elusive light, only to find the walls pushing back, pressing in on me in a suffocating embrace. The chamber began to fold in on itself, and the air thickened with an electricity that crackled with the promise of chaos and agony. Stop, I cried, a raw edge of panic giving bite to my plea. Face your family. The shadows howled in response, each voice layered with centuries of anguish that dripped like venom into the folds of my reality. They are all that remain, and here, they are alive. Just then, the wall on my right twisted, revealing a corridor pulsating with a dark light that beckoned me like a siren's song. Familiar scents wafted through the air, cinnamon from my grandmother's kitchen, grass from summer days spent at my aunt's house. Each inhale was a knife, slicing through my determination. Fighting against the tide of memories, I stumbled through the corridor, driven by instinct, desperation overriding my caution. The laughter of my ancestors surrounded me, growing louder and more insistent, inviting me back into the folds of their mournful embrace. I burst into a vast chamber where spectral figures danced to an unseen rhythm, the walls adorned with portraits of the forgotten. There stood my family, each face caught in an expression of haunting joy mixed with despair. They beckoned to me with outstretched arms, shadows weaving around their forms, promising warmth that I longed for, yet knew better than to trust. Why do you resist? My mother whispered, her voice the sweetest nectar and the sharpest poison. You belong with us. Return, and we will never be apart again. And oh, I shouted, my voice echoing futilely in the cavernous space, swallowing every ounce of my strength. I am not like you. I won't become another soul lost in this place. As their faces darkened with rage, the chamber began collapsing around me, shuddering with the weight of my defiance. But amidst the chaos, a single figure materialized before me, a shadow that was different, cloaked in a sorrowful light. The child stood there, palpable and pleading, though her features now radiated with an unfathomable pain. I can help you, she stammered, her voice shaky with what felt like realisha thin veneer over all-consuming darkness. You must listen. They're not your family anymore. They want you to join them, but I know the way out. I hesitated, feeling the tremor of trepidation ripple through me. It was a risk, an invitation among horrors and unfulfilled promises, but it felt like a chance, a fragile thread of hope tethered to despair. Where? The words slipped from my lips, before I could mull over the implications. Follow me, but you cannot look back, she urged. They will lie to you. They'll not rest until you are theirs. Just then, the cacophony escalated, the twisted faces of my family contorting into roars of fury, stretching, reaching for me with clawed hands, their cries mingling into a symphony of rage that shook the very foundations of the chamber. I took a step towards the child, my heart pounding as their anguished wails reached a fever pitch. But just as I prepared to follow, the shadows surged forward, and from the depths of the darkness emerged a figure so horrifying that it stole my Brea, the grotesque mirror image of me. Eyes consumed with malice, lips drawn back in a wicked grin. Choose. It roared, the echoes twisting into a vicious melody. Will you save your freedom or embrace your family's fate? In that instant, the creatures howled, and behind me the corridor blackened. The walls throbbed, the faces of my family distorting in rage as I realized that I stood on the precipice between the light, newly found and still vulnerable, and an abyss that clamored for my very soul, and I was forced to confront a devastating truth. There was no turning back. With one last heart-wrenching choice to make and shadows closing in around me, I braced myself for the depths of horror yet to come. The world around me surged with raw chaos as the duality of existence throbbed like a wretched heartbeat. The darkness closed in, a living entity clawing hungrily at my soul, forcing me to confront the very nature of my existence. I stood before the precipice of my own despair, trapped in a twisted tableau of memories and unfulfilled desires. The sinister reflection of myself grinned wider, its haunting visage twitching with glee. Choose. It taunted, each syllable dripping with wicked delight. It felt as though the shadows seeped into my thoughts, wrapping around my consciousness a grotesque dance meant to ensnare me within its vile grasp. Will you embrace the horror or will you lock the door behind you, never to return? Behind me, the mocking laughter of my family echoed through the chamber, layers of torment twisting their faces into a grotesque carnival of sorrow. They beckoned with frayed hands, urging me to yield to the darkness that felt both familiar and frighteningly alien. What would it take to free you from this wretched existence? The child's voice reached through the cacophony, clinging to my senses like a fragile hope amidst the storm. This way, my heart pounded, thrumming against the fragile fabric of my reality. But they were right behind me, very grieved whisper, every hollow laughter intertwined with my deepest fears, threatening to engulf everything in that relentless dark massage of despair. I could feel the discouragement pooling around me, pulling at my limbs with insistent fingers, begging me to succumb to their embrace. But the child was still there, her eyes wide with sincerity. I won't let you go. You're stronger than them. The words clawed at my throat. They felt like failure wrapped in struggle. An image swept through my mind, me mother's warm smile from the sunlight-soaked days of summer. Her laughter like silver bells, the tender embodiment of love that promised safety. Yet that image contorted, warped into a twisted mockery of itself. A grim reminder of the darkness that concealed itself in those cherished memories. I shouted, shaking my head as if to expel their influence. But even as I stood defiant, I could hear the surging tide of sorrow battering against the walls of my mind. You are nothing without us. My mother's voice lured, echoing over the chaos, filled with desperate sweetness that made my heart ache. You can't escape who you are. We were waiting for you. In that moment, despair surged. The shadows pressed in tighter, wrapping themselves around my heart like a vice. But there was a flicker of something deeper, a well of strength I had yet to tap into, and if I was to survive this, I would need it now more than ever. Stop! I screamed, forcing my voice to rise above the cacophony. The specter of my reflection smiled wider, its hunger palpable. You can't have me. With newfound resolve, I lunged toward the child. Show me. All around, the world trembled, but the shadows recoiled, the chamber illuminated by a surge of light that shone behind her. I could see it clearly now, a portal of swirling gold, whispering of a promised escape, freedom from the cycles of anguish and despair that had ensnared so many before me. Go, she urged, voice rising above the tumult as the shadows writhed, recoiling at the light's brilliant grasp. Yet just as I turned to claim my escape, I felt an iron grip pulling at my arm, dragging me back, desperately seeking to chain me to the past, to all that had occurred. The laughter swelled, a horrifying serenade stitching my fate tightly into theirs. I fought against it, every ounce of strength poured into breaking free. The light behind me pulsed with urgency, urging me to leap, and as hands reached out from the shadows, combining with anguished screams that became one, I struggled against the iron grip squeezing my heart, whispering promises of eternal loyalty. The flight of shadows surged forward, pooling closely, filling the air with darkness. Together forever, they screeched, and I felt the walls ripple, the laughter swelling, drowning any last vestiges of hope. In the throes of desperation, I recalled the flicker, the echo of love I had once experienced, and summoned it like flame to fire. In a desperate act of defiance, I turned toward the glimmer of light flooding the shadows. No, I screamed, pooling all my thoughts into a single thought, a whisper of truth that resonated deep within me. I choose my own path. I plunged into the brilliance, instinct carrying my haste. The moment I touched the light, it expanded outward, sending waves of energy pulsating through the darkness. My family's anguished cries resonated, warping into a haunting symphony. But I pushed through, my heart racing toward the truth that lay beyond. As I breached the threshold, a blinding light enveloped me, and I could hear the whispers receding, losing their grip. There, in that radiant expanse, I could feel the warmth of past embraces flooding my senses, distant yet undeniably a nostalgic twinge that illuminated the edges of my heart. But behind me came a final, bone-chilling roar, an echo enveloped in familiarity, a malignant glee that made my very soul tremble. You think you've escaped? The voices swirled together. We will always be with you. Darkness surged toward me one last time, and just before the light swallowed it all, before the laughter melded into a deafening silence, a shattering realization pierced me to the core. Even as I fled, the shadows had whispered their secrets deep into my spirit. The struggle was far from over, and perhaps the horror would twist and turn, born from within. It was then I understood the truth so visceral it almost crushed me would forever carry their echoes within my heart, haunted by the weight of all I had left behind, tethered not by their hold but by my own feeble humanity. And as I stepped into the light, I could only wonder when would the next darkness beckon me back to its embrace. Their final words latched onto my consciousness like a chilling epilogue. You can run, but we'll always be waiting. In that moment, the darkness shifted ever so slightly, a grim reminder that the horror I thought I had escaped was merely slumbering, waiting for the right moment to awaken once more.